I was 6 years old when the original Star Wars first hit theaters. I remember vividly the day my father came home from seeing it with my older brother. I remember exactly where I was sitting in the kitchen, where my sister and mother were. The front door flew open and my brother ran inside. My father followed him, a look on his face like he had just seen a ghost. He found my mother and said, "Jeff has to see this movie. Not should see this movie. He has to see this movie." I remember most moments from the movie itself. I had to ask my mother what terminate meant, and was horrified when she told me it meant to kill the princess. Perhaps the most memorable thing wasn't the movie itself, though. It was when I needed to go to the bathroom. My parents were so enthralled with the movie that they had me go by myself. It was the first time I had in a public place. When I got to the bathroom, I remember there was one other boy about my age in there as well. We looked at each other like, "Can you believe this? No one's supervising us. Everyone's so involved in the movie that they let their kids go alone to the bathroom." Like most people of my generation, I grew up watching the movies and playing with the toys. They literally turned me into a storyteller, and I'm a writer today. I saw the potential for that galaxy far, far away expanding into an enterprise of movies, shows, books, etc. I saw it partially realized in the Timothy Zahn novels and expanded universe. But when the disappointing prequels came out, followed by Disney's horrendous sequels, my interest waned. There have been bright spots, like the Clone Wars, Rogue One, and the first couple seasons of The Mandalorian. But the fact is, there's been more dips than highs, and it's a franchise that's now so muddled there's little reason to even try bringing it all back together. So by the time Andor was releasing, I was on my way out. I liked the character okay, and the idea of a series about the rise of the rebellion seemed good, but I had been burned too many times. My time is valuable, and I would rather put it into my own stories, or get inspired by burgeoning series like The Expanse. People said I was toxic for not liking the slop they were feeding us, which only pushed me away more. So I was no longer subscribed when the series began, but each week I heard more and more voices I respected say that it was great. This was the Star Wars series we had always wanted, what we had hoped for. I demurred. I had other things to do. But then one friend messaged me directly. He sent a text with only 2 words on it. "Dude, Andor." Right off the bat, you can tell that Andor is going to be a grounded, mature version of Star Wars. If you want flashing sabers and cheeky one-liners, you need to go elsewhere.
"I have a ball. Perhaps you'd like to bounce it."
Some people have criticized this as being the reason the show is not Star Wars. This argument always cracks me up, especially when it comes from someone who likes The Empire Strikes Back, because I vividly remember people making the exact same arguments against Empire when it first came out. The original Star Wars had been a space adventure akin to Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, and the generation who watched its first release had grown up with these series. They had expected the entire franchise to have that same happy-go-lucky tone, so when Empire was darker and grittier, they objected, the exact same way people complain about Andor. That argument is as valid now as it was then. A series can and should be able to develop. Otherwise, you wind up in a redundant cycle which gets old quickly. And when a franchise began nearly 50 years ago and most of the audience you've gained along the way are adults, there's all the more reason to do something smarter and more grown up. But before I continue, let's start with the title sequence. I have to admit that when I first heard it, I was confused by it. For a series that is known for exciting, emotional, and bombastic soundtracks, this minimalistic sound seemed like an odd choice. I listened to see if I felt differently with the second episode, but instead it was different instruments. The same with the third and fourth, and on until the last, each one sounding like it was a separate part of the orchestra. It wasn't until after the show was done I learned that you're supposed to hear all of them played together. The music at the beginning of every episode introduces a single piece of the orchestra, and as the show progresses, the various parts come together more and more until they are playing as one, just like the forming of an alliance. It even goes a step further to the point where you can listen to the combinations in each arc, and they make thematic sense of what happened during that arc. With that in mind, I should explain what I mean by each arc. In this 12-episode season, the show goes through 4 distinct storylines. They all combine into one, but they each have an enclosed narrative, like individual movies. In fact, each arc is about 2 hours long, so they're each a little more than a movie. I'm going to go through each arc individually and talk about the techniques of storytelling, from the writing to the directing to other choices. And I chose to begin my channel with this because it's such a great example of every part of storytelling, but also because Star Wars is where I began my own storytelling journey. So let's get started. I generally rail against formulas. I believe they are killing original storytelling, especially in the movie industry. However, there is one basic rule that does apply to stories in some way: the 3-act structure, or the beginning, middle, and end. Act 1, the beginning, is where characters and settings are introduced. People are not going to care about a story unless they somehow care about the characters, so they need to somehow be introduced here. The audience will also want to know where they are, and what the rules of the world are. They can only have tension if they understand this. So if they're in a world where Oompa Loompas run a street gang, you need to establish that early on so when a character gets run over by tiny green-haired people late in the story, they're not confused. So that's what this first arc is going to do. We start by introducing the titular character, Cassian Andor, who is searching for his sister. We learn about him and the gritty world he inhabits in just a few minutes. And there's no better way to say, get the kids out of the room, than to push him right into a brothel. But before we go on to introducing more characters and settings, we get the scene which would typically be called the inciting incident. That's the event which launches the main character into an adventure, and the story into its events. More importantly, though, it is the thematic thesis of the story. By the way, a quick note. For those who have not figured it out yet, I will be describing things in this series which would be considered spoilers. So if you haven't seen the show and are concerned about spoilers, just go watch the show. It's brilliant. It might just be the greatest sci-fi show ever made. It rivals the original Star Wars trilogy. Just go watch it. So when the 2 cops try to shake Andor down, he kills one of them. The other one is still alive and can identify him. Cassian is left with the dilemma of whether to let him live and risk having a witness, or killing him to eliminate all chance of that. A more shallow story would have simply had this fulfill the inciting incident part of the formula and patted itself on the head saying, good boy. But this story goes a step further, because it is the same dilemma Luthen is in later on when he allows Cassian to see him. In that relationship, Cassian becomes the cop, and Luthen becomes Cassian. He needs to close the loop by killing Cassian in the exact same way Cassian closed the loop by killing the second cop. And this chase becomes a major part of the plot, and more importantly, its theme, throughout. Next we get the introduction to our most important setting, Ferrix, and all of its inhabitants, who are so much a part of the setting, you could almost say the introduction of the people and the setting in this instance is nearly one and the same. We start with the droid, B2EMO, and I want to use his introduction to point out something about expression. We usually read meanings and emotions through facial expressions, so how do you express it without a face? Throughout the series, you will see B's head move in very specific ways. These relate to movements we associate with certain meanings. For example, watch when B2 looks confused and uncertain.
That's 2 lies.
Even when it's simply talking, it moves its head and body in expressive ways. This isn't the way a droid would actually move, but it projects feelings to the audience which personifies it, and causes us to feel more for it. B2's design and movements do this perfectly. Now on to Ferrix. We first see it through Cassian walking along. Holy crap, is that the Joker? That's the freaking Joker! Where's Batman? So we get this shot of the gloves, which is one of the best introductions to a setting I've ever seen. In one very straightforward shot, we are told what this place is. Blue collar, technicians, working class. You even get a sense of the type of people because they're not in uniform. They each have their own colors and styles. Without seeing the people, we get a sense of who they are. We then meet each of the people who are important in Cassian's life through an organic progression of the story, and in each introduction you get a sense of their shared histories. No one just talks about what they're currently doing. They say things like,
when it's done, pull your boots on and get to work. You look like a wreck.
I'm not one of these losers gonna let you float until they forget how much you owe them.
I fell.
On what? A jealous husband?
These all come from things that have happened. This provides their past without getting tied down in exposition. For instance, when Brazos says he's not loaning Cassian any money, it implies that Cassian has done that in the past, and people are getting tired of it. When he tells Bix he fell, she asks if it was on a jealous husband, implying he's a womanizer. When he tells Tim that Bix is tougher than both of them, He says,
I'm getting tired of hearing that.
and perhaps most importantly, no one seems surprised that he's in trouble. Also, everybody knows everyone. Speaking of providing a lot of information efficiently without sounding like exposition, the introduction of our first villain, Cyril Karn, follows the same ideology. One of the first things that we learn is that he got his uniform tailored. That, and the things he says about the murder case, show how serious he is about his job. The scene is further emphasized through the lackadaisical attitude of his superior. This contrast helps us get a sense of his overachieving nature. This continues to be emphasized by his subordinates also not taking things seriously, but he keeps whipping them into shape to do what it seems no one cares about. All along, we've been cutting back and forth to Cassian's childhood. To me, this was the first sign that this show would be truly different. Rather than making Cassian some hotshot kid with moxie waiting for his time to shine, they made him a child born into a native tribe. Through this, they are able to establish a unique background for him, but also begin the process of doing what no other Star Wars movie or series has done as effectively, shown why the Empire is so evil. And they don't need to do much to show it. Mostly through imagery we already know from the dark past of imperialism in the real world. And that brings in the character that this show might have actually been named for, Marva Andor. She is introduced both in the present, as an elderly woman keeping her head down while concerned about her adopted son, and a scavenger in the past who feels compelled to rescue a native boy. Every scene we have with her in these opening episodes are of concern for her little world she's built, and how it's formed. And of course, there is the man who brings the whole town together. I call him Hammerman. May we all feel as committed to our jobs as this man feels to his. All joking aside though, this is such a perfect way to portray the traditionalism and connectivity of this town. He rings them into work, then rings them out of work, and he does it through a private ceremony of his own. I cannot think of a better way to tie in the setting and the characters than this. We wrap up the introductions with Luthen and Linus Mosk, two men on opposite sides. What this show does so well is create characters that you care about on both sides, even though they are trying to kill one another. Luthen is introduced alone. He's often shot from the back, giving him a less personal and mysterious feel. He has no history with anyone we see, and he speaks like he has already considered all options. This causes us to feel less for him, and instead look to him for answers. And when we see his face, he is always glaring, always searching. I mean hell, even when you Google Stellan Skarsgård, you get an image of him looking intimidatingly through the screen at you like he's determined whether you can be trusted. Linus Mosk, meanwhile, well, we should all have a friend like Linus.
Well said, son.
As the arc draws closer to its climax, notice how not only the editing gets faster, but also the cutting between the past and the present. This brings the cause of the past and effects of the present closer together. Marva decides there's something more important than the things they've come to scavenge, saving the boy. That boy has decided there's something more important than making money on scavenged parts, joining this rebellion, or at least doing a job for them. Cyril, meanwhile, knows only duty. And he goes all out on a limb to capture Cassian, only to have everything blown up in his face. What's particularly impressive here is that the camera remains with him. Typically, a story would follow the hero as he zips away, but this one has you sit with the villain in his failure, and the numbness of his realization that he has broken the rules to get here, and now he is in a load of trouble. At last, the arc ends with the past and present coming together completely. Andor is a child sitting in the back of a ship, leaving everything he knew behind as Marva flies. And then Andor is an adult, once again in the back of a ship, leaving everything behind as he's flown into a larger world. This is part 1 of an 8-part series I'll be doing on Andor. I'm going to cover each arc and analyze it from a story point of view. If you like my analysis, let me know in the comments below and give me a thumb up. If this does well, I may do more in the future. And if you agree with my viewpoints on storytelling, you might want to try out one of my books. The link to my website is in the description. If you're a Star Wars fan, you might want to start with Relic Worlds. It's a mixture of Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Thank you for watching, and happy travels, everyone!